Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the Mercury retrograde that we have coming up. Full disclosure, I just said retrograde on the first take here. So I guess maybe it's already kind of kicking in. We are just about to get into the shadow of this, so I wanted to address this now. We will have it go actually full on retrograde from the 9th of November to the 29th of November. But we're getting into the shadow of it on the 21st of October, and that's going to carry through until the 17th of December. So we'll talk about those dates a little bit. We're going to look at this from a collective perspective, and then we're going to look at some of these aspects that it's making. There's a lot of really significant aspects that are tying all different areas of our lives together into this. And then we'll take this through sign by sign and look at the houses basically that this is taking place in for you and what it's very likely to be highlighting for you. So yeah, as I mentioned, the retrograde 9th to the 29th of November. I swear this one is going to hit me hard. It's starting right square to my own Mercury. So we'll see. We're going to get through it. Right? Just be patient with me for a few months here. I'm not going to be able to talk. But yeah, so that is starting at 6 degrees and 50 minutes of Sagittarius. And it's going back to about 20 degrees and 3/4 of Scorpio. So it's going to be across this area. Notice how these degrees are going to cover a lot of where we have planets in the sky. So Mars looks like it's outside of that. From this perspective, it is actually going to conjoin it in that space. And then look at how everything else is going to wind up being aligned to this. So it is going to tie everything together and be a really big review for us. What's standing out to me, perhaps most about this, is that there's going to be this new moon Cazimi that I have highlighted here in the chart. So as Mercury is retrograde and it goes back into Scorpio, then we have a new moon in Scorpio, which is going to be taking place about 16 minutes of arc away from it. And that is a really loud alignment there. It highlights, it brings really up to its height, the significance of that Mercury. So we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But yeah, so basically this Mercury is going backwards out of Sagittarius back into Scorpio. So this is going to bring up a lot of matters of like truth seeking, revision, reflection around beliefs is going to be a really big part of this, and how our plans are aligning with our sense of beliefs. I think there's going to be a lot of the past coming up with this Mercury retrograde in particular, a lot of just reviewing how things have played out for us, how we were expecting for them to play out, maybe what kinds of habits or ritualization of the energy that we're dealing with has gone and whether or not that's helpful for us. So really reviewing that, hopefully to be able to play with the high kind of joyful energy of Sagittarius with the very real and sometimes a bit gritty and sometimes a bit shadowy aspects of Scorpio as well. It's almost like there's something that we really need to look at internally that's going to allow us to be able to work with that Sagittarius energy better as Mercury winds up retracing its steps back into Sagittarius. So this is a very philosophical Mercury retrograde that we're going to be dealing with. It's not just going to be messing up our ability to speak or to think or communicate or understand things, though that will of course be a big part of it. There's a lot of spiritual introspection with this alignment here, and a lot of needing to be really honest with ourselves, and a need for a willingness to question everything, perhaps especially ourselves, perhaps especially the path and perspectives that we've developed up until this point. I think this is going to drive up in us a real desire to feel deeply that we understand, but this could even wind up getting to the point of reaching, like that questioning everything could wind up also inclining toward a sense of paranoia or getting too deep into pattern seeking or trying to understand the gaps that maybe just can't be understood. So especially when it has to do with past emotional experiences, reviewing those, reviewing trust issues, reviewing old wounds or things left unsaid. there could be a tendency to get kind of obsessive about this and really want to get some sense of closure around that, or some sense of relief, or some sense of a deeply felt renewal process that feels like we understand it in this kind of a holistic way. But sometimes we need to release things without fully understanding them. Sometimes things just happen the way that they happen. And yes, there's an underlying message to it, and that's always really helpful to understand the lessons that may be difficult experiences, or where we have gotten our hopes up and then felt like we have fallen backwards, or that things have gotten a bit heavier. And just looking at this Mercury going forward into Sagittarius and then winding up going backward into Scorpio here, there's probably a lot of like digging up unprocessed memories. And we could get, again, kind of obsessive about wanting to understand them completely. But there may just be a need to release at the point that we understand the lesson that was brought up. That might just be it. We might just need to leave it at that. And we might just need to figure out, okay, what of this is serving me? What's not? And the aspects of it that are not, we may not need the answers around that. We may just need to leave that in the past. So especially on a house by house basis, the area of our lives where this is taking place, there's going to be a real opportunity for a redo around some aspect of our life, to make new decisions, to review our plans going forward, to consider alternative options or alternative ways of looking at where we're at, maybe even to like re-narrativize around where we're at. And again, I am cautioning to use the words like re-narrativizing around the past, because I don't think that this is so much about getting more and more and more into those old stories. I think that this is really about looking at them as honestly as we can, accepting them for what they are, and then trying really to move on. What's interesting about the past aspect of this, because notice here during this Mercury new moon Cazimi, this Mercury retrograde new moon Cazimi, which is just crazy. Mercury's retrograde, Jupiter is retrograde, and Saturn is retrograde. And that Mercury is coming back to align really, really closely with these two just a few days after this new moon. There may be something of a seed deeper in the past, something that, again, those hopes may be feeling dashed, or the magic of something kind of wearing off. Some hope or aspiration or dream that we had, or a way of looking at our lives that was kind of romanticized or excited about the future, that maybe has gotten dampened down. I mean, I feel like for a lot of people, that's been the case, that people have been feeling just really serious and like, oh, I need to stay on track. I need to keep on top of things. And again, there's this kind of like fight or flight thing that's, of course, going on in society, that kind of energy. And coming back to and looking at times before that and looking at how we felt about things and recognizing that we are still capable of taking on that energy, of being optimistic about things, of not needing to get into that optimistic energy and then pull ourselves back into a sense of, oh, but what if something goes wrong, because maybe something went wrong in the past in this one instance. And so therefore, again, like there's that obsessive aspect of always looking at what has gone wrong so that we can protect ourselves from that. But that also is something of a cage. It's like a prison that we can keep ourselves in, expecting for things to go wrong, expecting for interactions to go wrong, expecting for people to judge us if we are excitable or something like this. So just looking at however that is for you, where it is that you stop yourselves in your tracks with regard to optimism, there's probably something of a seed in the past to just kind of look at it and say, why not have this again? Why not have that seed of hope again? Likely a lot of the answers about why not, or the unconscious reasoning that maybe you're noticing there, it's probably external, right? So this is a really internal process that we're going through with this alignment. And I really just want to highlight that there, that just because things are looking weird in the world doesn't mean that the story is going in a terrible direction. This is just one arc of the story. And for those of us who can really remain optimistic, I think that's going to be incredibly important, not just for ourselves and not just for the impact that we can directly have on people kind of overtly around us, maintaining that hope and that optimism, but also maintaining that energy in the world. I feel like that's part of the reason why it's become this weird kind of universalized experience recently of feeling kind of hopeless and feeling like things are just going totally awry and feeling helpless about the direction of it. It's just that that's the energy that's getting sown in the ether, right? So it's going to take a lot of effort to hold on to those strands of optimism and hope that things are going to go right, that we are going to wind up pushing this in a good direction, again, especially starting next year when things get more active again. But processing internally where our blockages to that are during this period of time, I think is going to be really significant. So yeah, when it comes to these matters of belief with this alignment in these water signs, there's so much emphasis on water signs throughout this season. There's these reversals, these mixing of energies, revisiting these ongoing themes of belief that we're going to be dealing with all winter, but this extra retrograde of Mercury as well, I think is going to help us a lot to be able to bring that more into the conscious mind. So in terms of planning, are we doom planning? I've certainly caught myself in those kinds of things recently of what if this, what if that. But there is this ability of humans to adapt to different situations. So staying in that worst case scenario framework when it comes to our plans, or setting aside as frivolous the more lighthearted, excitable, optimistic aspects of our plans for, again, those things that we've been super serious about in this kind of weird survival mode collectively around. I think that looking at how those might be, again, blocking us is going to be really helpful. We can respond to curveballs. So those little things that do wind up popping up, we can respond to those in the moment. But if we are trying to plan for every possible curveball, we're going to get so caged in, and we're going to be, if we are political people, right, and we think that there's some kind of weird influence that is trying to be had over people, you're doing their work for them, basically, is probably the way to look at that if you're trying to plan for every possible thing that could go wrong, right? So trying to get our minds out of that space by going back and looking at it, right? So review of values, hopefully revealing a desire for comfort over a desire to win. So there is that energy, again, going around of different sides trying to win out over another side. But this, I think, desire for comfort is going to be a little bit more important. How can we function as a society? How can we function as individuals interacting with each other, as families, as communities? How do we make that work together? It is going to have to be through some sense of optimism and just desire for things to go well, more so than a desire for this kind of negatively tinged justice against something else, right? When we get ourselves in that energy, we're playing that game. And that's the game that I think is in the ether that really needs to be worked through on a collective level. And the more that we can do this individually, I think the more that we can kind of turn the energetic tide in that direction of, no, we need to figure out how we can function together, right? How we can create a sense of comfort for ourselves, and then therefore in the energy, and then therefore hopefully together at some point. Now, this is ultimately working toward a sense of order and comprehension, certainly. But this is that kind of internal reflective period. This isn't so much about going out and doing something with what it is that we're learning about our triggers and about our shadow and our fears and things like this. So there's a desire to know what we're working toward. There's a desire to have some sort of comfort at the end of that, some comfort that we're working toward, right? Some sense of understanding the world that we're living in. And that's been a difficult thing recently to really be able to grasp onto. But again, working through those aspects of ourselves that have been participating in that weird energetic game that's going on right now, looking at that, releasing that, detaching from that, focusing inward, focusing on ourselves and the energy that we are carrying. There's a huge opportunity for purging with Scorpio, which is something I've been talking about quite a bit because of the fact that we have all of these planets going through Scorpio right now and aligning with Jupiter and Saturn, which is very significant, not to mention, all of the planets really. And I really think that that's what we're being called to do, especially with this new moon. It's such a fascinating alignment. But yeah, so on a personal level, sense of sensitivity, reasonability, working on that. How can we tap into that in a more positive way rather than more of a defensive way or putting up guards with other people, digging in our heels on this or that or whatever kind of side and having our minds in that conflictual framework. And that doesn't mean put aside your values, not remotely. I have my own very strong biases, and I really hope that these things go in a specific direction. And again, when I'm looking at this situation that we're in the world on an energetic level, it sadly makes a lot of sense because of the fact that we are so dug in and that there is this weird desire for justice against the other side over most other things. And a lot of this is fear driven because there's so much fear around slippage and things like this. But we can't really get to a sense of comfort and community if we remain in that energetic game, right? Not if we want to avoid the most extreme cases of purging. So sensitivity, reasonability, possibly tuning out a bit more. Again, the sensitivity here is going to respond a bit stronger to the messaging, the news, the loud voices that are, usually carrying some of the rougher edges in society. So the extent to which we can kind of connect with each other in a sensitive and reasonable way, that we're not feeling like we need to get something out of each other, things like this. Getting back to these healthy human ways of relating, right? Being really flexible and patient with ourselves. That's another thing I'm going to be preaching quite a bit throughout this season, is that purging isn't usually something that happens overnight. If you're able to do that, that is absolutely wonderful. And I wouldn't question that sometimes that is a possibility of just a dawning realization that kind of solves a lot of things. But being patient with ourselves through the process of releasing some of these more difficult energies that have been bombarding us, right? And not engaging with them. So also remaining flexible with ourselves too. So with regard to our beliefs, our ideas, our decisions, don't want to say don't make any decisions throughout the season, but I do feel like there's so many reversals in the energy coming up that it would be wise, if we can put a decision off, to not pressure ourselves and be impatient with ourselves and get into that fight or flight, I need to make a decision right now, otherwise I can't feel comfortable kind of energy. And then, yeah, again, around beliefs and sides and things like that, and then our ideas and our envisioning of how things are going to play out for better or worse, remaining kind of flexible about how these things wind up looking. I'm hoping that that's making sense. Because the thing is, we do have all these alignments to Jupiter and Saturn, which tend to speak to our long-term plans. But right now, this time around, they're going to be at trines with each other in the fire signs, and that's going to be a little bit more active. That'll be next year and then the following year. But right now they're in the water signs. They're in this kind of having Jupiter turning retrograde, Saturn having just been retrograde, Mercury going retrograde, and them all being in these water signs. It's not just about the concrete or material plans, the external plans, the ambitions, and the aspirations, and like pushing ourselves to achieve and things like that. It's more about tapping into what is the purpose behind that? What is the why behind that? If that is fully material, that whole world right now is in flux anyway. And so feeling that we're able to tap into a sense of purpose and our why behind things, I think is going to be a lot more substantial for us and a lot more significant going forward. So again, for instance, if you are in a position where maybe you're in a line of work that used to feel very purposeful, but now it has gotten into this kind of habitual doing it for the paycheck, which is very necessary, kind of an energy. And then therefore there's this kind of resistance to it because it feels like maybe it's not as tied to the why or the purpose behind it or why it was enjoyable at a certain point. If we're able to look back and tap more into that why, rather than just the material external motivations, that I think is what this is pulling us into, that aspect of our long-term plans. What is the comfort that we're creating for ourselves? What is the joy, the purpose that we're creating for ourselves? Also, really reconsidering our relationships with risk. So risk is a big thing with regard to both Sagittarius and Scorpio as well. Sagittarius can be a real risk taker, whereas Scorpio can be very risk averse. And so looking at and reconsidering our relationship with risk, again, I feel like a lot of the energy has kind of pulled back into this risk averse kind of area, while I do see a lot of people pushing themselves to take risks. And it's this kind of interesting dichotomy of this kind of feel the fear, but do it anyway. I almost wonder if there's something here that's also coming in about maybe feeling the fear a little bit less as well. Maybe not needing to approach risk from that kind of an energy. What is our relationship with risk? Is that something that we're comfortable with? Again, a lot of these questions are just about like how locked into the conflictual energy that's been going on in the ether around this fight or flight habit and ritual that society has been kind of pushed toward and collectives have kind of been pushed toward energetically. Looking at that shadow there, I'm pretty sure almost every single one of us have had these kinds of responses to what's going on in the world on one level or another. So there's certainly no shame in it. And just looking at that and seeing where it's not helping you, where it's actually really hindering you and your ability to have a good impact on other people and the energy that you are putting out into the world as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if, again, we're all reviewing some really big picture plans that have been in place for some time. One thing I will say is that decisions should be taking longer. Again, I'm preaching that patience with ourselves around decision making. We may even be finding ourselves with some difficulty concentrating on tasks at hand around this time. So also being really patient with other people. I think there's going to include a lot more with this retrograde of an issue of daydreaming about these goals and aspirations than usual. And again, possibly not so much the trappings of what our goals and our achievements are attached to, but rather the energy of it, how it is that we're wanting to feel. I also wouldn't be surprised if in the public discourse, there's a lot around the frustration of feeling like one is unable to plan one's future due to the kind of erraticness and the technological shifts and stuff like that we've been dealing with. But again, there is still an anchor that's possible. And that is, how is it that we're wanting to feel about our lives? How is it that we're wanting to feel about those around us? And what kinds of energies are we wanting to connect to? Yeah, there may be a bit of a lack of those kinds of energies around right now because of the fact that we've all kind of gotten pulled into this weird kind of conflictual, protective, guarded thing, right? But the more that we can create that, the more of us that can create that, the more of us that there are to kind of tap into in terms of community and support with all of this as well. So yeah, looking at that why, I think is going to be, again, really significant here. So let's go ahead and look at some of the actual alignments that are happening here. So as I mentioned, this is a huge one, this Grand Water Trine. I looked at this as a series of alignments in a recent video where we had Mars and Mercury come through here, and then we had the Mercury Retrograde coming through here with the Sun aligning to it. Mercury continues to go retrograde and winds up aligning with Venus in this area. So a lot of planets are coming through and aligning to Jupiter and Saturn, who are both switching direction at 25 degrees in November. So they are basically stopped. They hold for a very long time this general 24 to 26 degree range. perfect for all of these things that are going through Scorpio, late Scorpio, right around this period of time to align to them in these really significant ways. Mercury is doing that 3 times. And when we're dealing with all of these, we are dealing with principles of mind in some way or another, and form, and the order that can be created from mind and from plans and from frameworks and things like this, paradigms basically. So there's a lot of matters of, like, again, details in a big picture plan. But in water signs, there is this kind of spirited, emotional aspect to this of why. So as I mentioned, like considering one's relationship, your own relationship to safety, security, cohesion, connection, meaning, there's a lot of ideas here, I think, around how to restrict things in order to feel safe and secure. This isn't inherent to the alignment, but that is a potential downside here where we're getting more into that kind of grasping on kind of energy. So where is it that we can relax a bit? Where is it that we can bring in a bit more of the spiritual or intuitive aspects of these water signs that are available to us around our plans and around how to push ourselves forward? So I would say a big aspect of this as well is going to be mental health and self-care, and need to address those fears as they come up. Those are going to cycle at times, so they may actually feel internally a little bit louder. And I think that that's actually going to be helpful so that we can look at them and hopefully purge them, right? There may also be this coming back to review past ideas, past structures, past connections, past communities, past motivating factors, right? So going back to some things that once felt good and maybe went a little bit awry, maybe due even to overthinking or to fear or things like this. So this may have something to do, I'm just going to look at this kind of thematically in terms of the planets that are involved, around travel, ideas, learning, understanding, comprehension, documents, agreements. These are all going to come back up for review on a personal level. We may even see trade come up on a global level and review around maybe some agreements that have been made along those lines as well. So to put all of this a little bit differently, what is the life that we've created for ourselves? What is the energy that we stew in, basically, that we're choosing ultimately? Is that helpful? Is that healthy? If it's not, a need to release and detox from that, and then definitely practice some self-care and some nurturance, basically, of mind, spirit, emotions. Looking at that aspect, then trying to put some plans into place, trying to sort out some of the details. There's a major focus on this kind of belief-based motivation here, getting in touch with why. Now, on a global level, there's going to be something here probably about structure and the limits of ideas and words. So there could be some good news here, like intellectual or communicative breakthroughs that are going to help when it comes to matters of structure and matters of how our structures collectively are going to go forward. There's a desire again, and possibly a lot of discourse around order and comprehension with regard to all of that. We could be reviewing with this retrograde some new or newly enforced rules as well, and understanding, kind of putting pieces together around that and bringing it into a sense of being able to understand, again, how is it that we're going to be moving forward? So I do think that even in the collective, we're going to get some help in terms of not feeling like we're staring into some unknowable abyss when we're looking at the future, right? So there's some sense of at least understanding the ground that we do still stand on here. This is also likely to be really helpful for media and for speech. But again, there may be this matter of the limits of ideas and words that are also kind of being recognized here, or limitations upon that are being kind of recognized. Additionally, review around authorizations, documents, again, agreements. Accountability is a big theme here. I've been mentioning that quite a bit recently. And then calculating or very precise language about things that have happened. So if we are dealing with issues from the past with each other as well, I think being really cautious with our words and not saying things that we'll want to be accountable for later, especially in anger or being defensive, things like that is going to be really important under this influence. So I have multiple dates here because we're getting 3 alignments within the shadow area of Mercury, within this retrograde area of the sky. So on the 24th, 25th of October, we have that alignment going direct as Mercury is moving into Sagittarius. It will go retrograde, and then it will align again around the 22nd of November, retrograde. It will then go back to about 20 degrees, and then around the 6th, 7th of December, it's going to be going direct through this area and making this alignment again. So we have multiple passes at this. And this alignment on the 22nd looks so powerful to me just because they're all retrograde. It is rare to have a retrograde grand trine because you have to get, especially with these 2 outer planets, it's such a short period of time that 2 planets at a trine to each other like this, when the sun is over here, are going to stay retrograde. They're both going to be changing directions, is what happens when you have outer planets in alignment like this. But the fact that we then have that Mercury retrograde just happening to occur right around the same time, it's really powerful and fascinating. There's going to be such a richness to all of our inner worlds. A lot is going to be going on. So again, being patient with each other, allowing for yourself to daydream and sort things out, I think is going to be quite powerful. And then, yeah, just a weird kind of thorough understanding, I think, by the 6th, 7th of December when it comes through direct again. And we've looked at that from so many different angles. So finally, just a few more thoughts about all of these being retrograde and aligned to each other. Really thorough introspection about what's truly important, what's a priority, what we believe is real and true for us personally. And also, again, with Mercury involved here, and then these more structural planets of Jupiter and Saturn, how the media impacts us internally, emotionally, psychologically as well. Reviewing, reconsidering the impacts of past decisions and actions, trying to figure out, again, how the pieces could wind up coming back together and where things may have become a little bit messy or ad hoc, where we're not following a set of plans that are philosophically or ethically based. So another thing that I'm picking up here with this is that there's this revising of long-term plans with a more philosophical or ethical lens. So integrating the lessons from the past and maybe even from some past missteps or what we would perceive of to be that past lessons into our current worldview, into our current responsibilities, and then having a sense of mental maturity and clarity about what we really want. Even if this is still behind the scenes, we shouldn't really expect the external results to appear immediately. What's more important right now is this internal realignment. And finally, since all of these planets are retrograde as well, there's a really high emphasis on the past. So people, ideas or projects that wind up resurfacing from the past, whether internally or externally, paying attention to that, I think, is also going to be quite important. Now, we also then have this alignment to the outer planets that's coming up, which is with Pluto a little bit off to the side. Pluto is in this air sign Aquarius at 1 degree. We have Neptune around, it's going to be at 29 degrees this whole time. Uranus is going to be around 29 degrees for a lot of this. It's going to get a little bit complicated and hairy as I explain this, but this opposition here is going to look a little bit different on different sides. So we'll go through that as its own thing as well. And then, yeah, Mercury over here. So we have this basket alignment. Some call it a cradle. And when it's direct, that's going to be around the 29th to the 30th of October, the first pass. It will go, that Mercury retrograde will align with it again around the 17th to the 19th of November. And then as it moves direct again around the 10th to the 13th of December, we're approaching this again with a different state of mind, right? So with the more full understanding of what we've learned throughout this period of time. So on a high level, looking at this as an aspect pattern, there is this sense of internal rebellion or tension building under the surface, these kinds of sudden shifts in mindset or values that come from within rather than from external events. So looking at old comfort zones and how they've changed in recent years, because we have this big review process coming in with Uranus and Neptune also going retrograde back into signs that they had been in for a long time, but that they're moving out of. They moved out of them this past summer, and they will be moving out of them permanently starting next year. So this is a deepening of a review of the past 7+ years, basically, looking at those old comfort zones, looking at how those comfort zones have changed, and then how they may have been holding you back, and especially from action and from, again, some sense of comfort in taking risks, some sense of an ability to safely challenge your own limits. So I would not be surprised if there are some really surprising, like overdue insights into self, into psyche, into belief, and again, where we hold ourselves back with all of this. So there is this big narrative question that's coming up with these alignments. What are the stories that we tell ourselves about what's possible for us and what's safe for us, right? Really disrupting then our own assumptions about that to try and get us a bit more comfortable with where we're at, or a bit more aware. Let me put it that way. More aware of what's going on subconsciously and unconsciously for us individually, but then also collectively and in the ether, because there's messages that we pick up on from there as well. And what are the assumptions that underlie that? And are they outdated? Spoiler alert, yes, they are outdated. We're moving into a completely new energy starting next year. So looking at those, purging some of those. There's also a really strong energy of imagination, of empathy, of caretaking. And this may be something that we're mulling over quite a bit. What is the priority that's placed on that right now? Do we feel like we're able to rely upon other people? Do we feel comfortable with others relying upon us? What is our sense of community and our connection to that, right? So specifically with regard to the trine to Neptune, this is what's really enhancing this kind of creative communication, dream work. There may be some really strong dreams, also the daydreams that I mentioned too, and artistic expression. So this should hopefully make our thoughts a bit more idealistic, a bit more spiritual, a bit more abstract. This should also hopefully heighten empathy, compassion, emotional intelligence collectively, in addition to a sense of curiosity and mental or internal, cerebral, even like psychic exploration, right? So an openness to that. We may even see that quite a bit in the discourse as well. People talking about their dreams, or people talking about the energies or the vibes, and whatever language that people have to describe these things that people feel from the ether, right? One thing with this is that it can blur some lines between fantasy and reality. So those of us who are prone to delusions and things like this will be picking up on some of that from this. That is something that's really worth keeping in mind. People might get a bit whipped up into a frenzy about, again, these stories that are believed and how they're framed. And the ability of some people to frame stories in such a way to elicit or to evoke a certain kind of delusional response to it. So what we wish were true, that kind of truthiness that I've been mentioning again recently, what feels true to one or another individual. People on the whole, especially people who are not super conscious about what they're doing, may fall into some of that. So some will believe things that they will also need to review, possibly related to this Neptune and Pisces over the past many years. So reconsidering belief structures, the usefulness, helpfulness, truth of these. There will be people who are tapping into this energy and are kind of picking up on it, who do that, whether consciously or unconsciously, whether they recognize it as an astrological kind of an alignment or energy that is out there or not. Now, this general period of time, maybe not so much this the actual retrograde, but certainly when we come back with that direct, this is really useful for rebuilding beliefs, to create and review imaginative or creative projects. So we will get to step forward with something new from this again, but keeping in mind just patience with self. The review process is kind of more important than anything throughout this. Additionally, for people who are doing spiritual work or really looking at the collective unconscious and maybe trying to speak to what's going on energetically. This is really giving Mercury the access to the collective unconscious, to matters of symbolism and the kind of archetypes that we're dealing with collectively right now, as well as some level of emotional nuance. So in terms of like artistic or spiritual work that involves that collective unconscious, this is making that really accessible, but certainly worth intentionally trying to ground your insights. One thing I do worry about with this is some people, quite a few people potentially falling for some AI stuff on like another level, like maybe some really big instance of that. Hopefully that winds up, if that happens, and then that Mercury winds up running backward toward Jupiter and Saturn might decide, okay, there's something we need to do about that, some kind of regulation. Now, the opposition to Uranus is funky because the first time that we get this, I'm going to have to splice in a visual of this. I just looked at my slides and I don't quite have it, but I do want to show this. The first opposition when Mercury is direct around the 29th, 30th, that will be from Sagittarius to Gemini. Uranus is going to be at that first degree of Gemini, moving retrograde toward the cusp with Taurus. That means that Mercury rules that Uranus because Uranus is a visitor in its home. That Mercury is responsible for that Uranus, but they can communicate with each other a bit more directly. Now, Mercury is not going to be in the best position to address the needs of that Uranus because it's going to be in the sign of its detriment in Sagittarius, but it is in connection, it's in communication with it. So at least the needs of that Uranus in Gemini can be heard by its host, right? So this is probably the most challenging of the aspects here, this opposition between these two. It can cause a lot of mental tension, sudden insights, very erratic communication. There's a risk here, especially when this is in retrograde, of speaking too soon, of interrupting, of being misunderstood, of being taken totally wrong, right? Now, there is some brilliance that's also possible with this alignment, but just as much disruption, rebellion, contrarianism for the sake of it kind of energy there. This knee-jerk reaction to the things that people are saying or the ideas that people are putting out there. So there's going to be these themes of kind of nervous energy, information overload, these flashes of insight that are coming in when we get these oppositions. When it comes to information, this does speak to unexpected or unconventional information. Convention is coming up for another big shakeup by this Uranus going back into Taurus. And it will be coming back into their kind of having mastered a lot of that ground at this point after having spent about 7 years there in a weird spot for Uranus to be in, where there will be a huge questioning of authority, that question everything that's coming up with that Sagittarius, Scorpio, Mercury retrograde that's coming up. Uranus going backward from Gemini into Taurus, having been reminded of what liberation actually looks like, right? It's coming back into Taurus and it will be really questioning authority and questioning structures and questioning convention or tradition. And there's going to be a real craving, I think, with these alignments around intellectual freedom. So there's a huge potential for breakthroughs, but again, it's going to be disruptive is the thing. So there's going to be edges to it. So potential shocking communications as well, shocking truths, distractions, tricks of tongue could also wind up coming through here, tricks of mind, social trickery as well, like stirring up people's emotions about, oh, did you know that this person did this and it's not true whatsoever, kind of a thing. So keeping an eye open for that. Be careful what we believe during this time. Again, I have my biases. I know everyone does. But keeping an eye on what it is that we're believing around this time, because there's likely to be some surprises. Let me even put it this way. Even if we're just looking at it from the perspective of something outside of what we typically believe in, could put a message into the inside of that to stir something up. These are both very trickstery kinds of energies. Mercury is the trickster. It winds up absorbing a lot of the energy that it's dealing with. And when it's aligned to Uranus here, it is also aligned to both Pluto and to Neptune. So these can spin some real stories, and they can spin some things that are just totally like created, fabricated whole cloth, right? So just again, being careful what it is that we're believing and any sort of knee-jerk reactions that we're having to these things. So we have just one opposition in Gemini and Sagittarius. So on that direct, which is coming later this month, that one's probably going to be on the 30th of October. Something may wind up seeming suspended in a disrupted state from that point, especially again, matters of truth, communication, documentation, changes to bureaucracy, perhaps even premature announcements or something like that. Reason that I say that is going to be in a stuck kind of stagnated or suspended state is that like when Mercury comes back to that point in the sky, Uranus is not there. Uranus is in a different sign at this point. So it may not even be until like Pisces season or Gemini season that I would actually say Gemini season, because in Pisces season, Uranus will still be in Taurus. So it would actually be the Mercury conjunction to Uranus. That's the next hard aspect we'll get from those two as Uranus moves back into that point where it'll be when it first opposes, Mercury first opposes it. So again, there may be something that gets stuck for like 6 months from that point, which could be kind of a bit frustrating, but I do think that that's going to be more of a collective kind of a thing. Now, there's also these energies of like severing connections. Uranus can cause surprising or disruptive severing of ties and connections, exchanges. There could be some surprising numbers, some data issues or issues around credentials for data, credentials for information security, especially with the way that this alignment is taking place. Perhaps even like an international breach of data security or something like this, with the Gemini Sagittarius opposition turning into a Taurus Scorpio opposition, right? There could be leaks of information, and perhaps the source will not be discovered with this if it takes place, especially in that first opposition in October. So I see a lot of potential for outages, potential hacks, and things like that. Perhaps especially with regard to commerce, exchange, trade disruption, changes, things like this, fluctuations. These could also speak to some final financial flow and value, like evaluation kinds of disruptions coming through with Uranus moving back for this final time into Taurus as well. And there could also be social media changes and announcements along those lines, or some really big surprises on social media that's coming through there. And sorry, I know that was a lot, but I spent a lot of time thinking about that opposition. It's a bit of a trip, the way that one is lining up. Now, we also then have the sextile to Pluto, and that's giving some access, it's giving some support, but it does also reinforce some of the tricksterish kinds of energy here, and it does bring up these psychological, emotional themes a little bit more, as well as things around revelation. So hopefully this is helping us with each other, like on a personal, collective level, to discuss psychological, emotional, difficult topics, what it is that we're thinking and feeling, what our fears are about, maybe what we're experiencing or things like this, or have experienced, maybe making each other feel more comfortable, more accepted, and less like this is something that needs to be held in for fear of shame or something like this. So also potential to articulate and comprehend power dynamics. And there may even be some revelation that gets us talking about that, either on a community collective level or on like a global collective level as well. Now, there is also let me just say quickly, also investigation, research, digging into things, getting secrets and stuff like that, huge for this. So journalists should be making some really good progress. We probably won't get these stories quite yet, but I think there's a lot of stories that will be coming up that will have been worked up during this period of time behind the scenes. Now, there is the ability to get carried away with stories, with grievance with this alignment, and with casting ourselves in hero roles and others in villain roles. And so there can be with this as well an energy, and this is going to echo something I already said, but it's part of this whole alignment. These kinds of manipulative stories, psychological kind of tactics and things like that around persuasion or fear or threats and things like that. So just, when those kinds of shadowy things come up, I would just really try and be honest with yourself about it. I don't think that the broader purpose right now is for us to feel fear. I think that the bigger purpose to that is to have us look at our fear and to purge it and to not allow for ourselves to be able to be manipulated utilizing our fears, right? So I really want to get that across. Also, just big changes with this specific wedge pattern is what I call this, the opposition with Uranus and then the way that that's tied into Pluto. Innovative ideas, disruptive communication, shocking reactions, of course, during all of these. Now, we do have one other bit rough around the edges, conjunctions that's coming up. Now, I will say that on the 20th of October, we do have that that Mercury Mars conjunction in Scorpio coming up. I have an asterisk here. I wanted to mention it because it is kind of relevant, but it's just outside of the shadow. So it's not technically a part of the Mercury retrograde that is taking place in. So this one that's coming up in the retrograde might not be about what is happening on the 20th. So there might not be that time vortex, weird kinds of connection between what's going on the 20th and what's going on the 12th. Just throwing that out there. And when it comes to this one, I discussed the Mercury Mars conjunction in Scorpio in a recent video. I will link to that if you're interested in that one, because I know that that's happening pretty much when I'm publishing this video. I want to focus on the Sagittarius conjunction that's coming up right as Mercury turns retrograde. So with this, we are dealing with potentially very strong, sharp tongues, very quick wit, impulsive words and fighting words, right? But bold. This kind of fearlessness to the language and this potential like dogmatism or righteousness to the words that are being put forth. There's this real amped up mental energy with this that can wind up leading to debates or arguments. This can also be some really bold truths coming out, like people just being really courageous in their language as well. But there's going to be underlying that certainly some strong opinions. And some of that might be, again, dogmatic or righteous in Sagittarius here. No offense to Sagittarius. But the thinking itself is really adventurous. There's a curiosity, a philosophical kind of energy to this, a freedom-loving. When it comes to restrictions on free speech, this thing is not going to be having it. It's not going to be having it. There's probably going to be a big fight or debate around freedom of speech because we do have a controlling energy of Mars on a debilitated Mercury retrograde. But in Sagittarius, it's a mismatch of energy and it's kind of explosive. So I don't think that this is going to be having it. So mental restlessness, frustration, possibly even making bold statements and then second guessing them. Things like this could be coming up here. So Mars is adding a lot of drive and aggression to Mercury with this alignment. And this can be really brilliant in debate and writing and activism, but it can also be very dangerous if it's not channeled properly. It can be explosive in words in situations and scenarios where that's not really called for. Or there could be this internal restlessness around these philosophical, political, ideological issues that are coming up in the world, holding on to that energy and then having it spew out in a wrong direction, right? So careful where you're slinging those arrows. Also really good to choose your battles under this influence here. But I will say it is fun for sure. This is like a fun energy, which is different than a lot of what we're dealing with when it comes to these retrogrades until at least we get Mercury kind of back into Sag and maybe being a little bit more like intellectually optimistic, which yes, there's pros and cons to both Sag and Scorpio, and it's great that we're getting both of them together. But this has a very different energy to it, and it makes sense that it's not connected to the previous conjunction, that these conjunctions are separated by the fact that one is in the shadow, which is during the retrograde, and one is not, right? This is just what it is. So the next thing that we have in terms of starting dates, notice that's how I have these laid out, is which is the first exact one. If that wasn't clear, we have the 24th, 25th of October, the first one on the Grand Trine. The basket is 29th, 30th is the first one. We have the 12th of November is the first real one here. And then the 20th of November is the new Moon Cazimi. So again, I think this one is my favorite alignment. It is crazy. It's going to set a lot of things off. Now, it's not all going to be pretty at all. I think actually a lot of this is going to be kind of ugly, but there's also going to be some fascinating mask off moments publicly in one-on-one connections, and then also to ourselves internally, like shadow mask coming off with this as well. So globally, we'll deal with that first. Potential shocking extremes of behavior, the reactivity and things like that. Notice that this, on the 20th of November, this new Moon Cazimi is very close to exactly opposite to Uranus there. So not only do we have this Cazimi and this really strong alignment on this side, but it is in a very strong alignment to both Uranus and to Neptune there. Explosive, again, delusional potentially as well, paranoid, obsessive, troubled minds kinds of stuff is going to be coming out. Some of it will be coming out as action. Might be worth avoiding some crowds here under this influence. That is something that I tend to throw out here and there when there's a bit of an elevated risk, I think, of people who are not very well. Additionally, in this third decan of Scorpio, there is this strong energy of like scandal or impropriety. And that could be something that is coming out. There may be some accountability due to information or news that's coming out around that, or it's coming out publicly, like crude words could come out. It's kind of Freudian slips or something like this that could give some really strong insight into a very troubled mind. Or there could be these words that are coming out that may even be clearly to a lot of people intended to stoke fear, like emotional, psychological manipulation and things like that. Now, some will fall into that because we have that trine to Neptune for sure, but not everyone will. And I think that this could be one of those moments in a series of moments that peel people off of certain energies that are trying to create fear in the world. So matters of fear and security come up when we're dealing with Scorpio and Taurus oppositions. And there could be this weird energy of like Austin Coppock when he speaks of this decan debauchery specifically. So of course we've seen that issue in the news quite a bit, these issues around like instant gratification and so forth. So that could also be something where there's this kind of mask off moment. And hidden knowledge or leaks and things like that also potentially coming out around this time. So insights from the past, hidden information, possibly even like long lost documents or cold cases, basically old ideas resurfacing in the collective awareness, and there may be some accountability that winds up coming from that as well. And there could even be, when it comes to these narratives that are being built up with Neptune, this kind of revisionism or this like exposure of corruption, reanalyzing past agreements, past documents. This could even speak to the opening or reopening of some kind of a lawsuit or legal concern as well, or some kind of process basically with Mercury involved here. And yeah, finally, just like a lot of potential volatility around this. So there may be this kind of sense of uncertainty that is really strong and potent in this moment when it comes to like markets, media, international, global bodies, when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to decisions that are being made, those being made without clarity of sight, right? So there's a lot when we have that new moon, which is dark, when we have that Mercury that is around this period of time combust. There can be a lot of stuff around this time that is just very unclear. Now, on a personal or more like just collective community level, this can also speak to ideological clean slates. So fresh thoughts, innovative ideas that aren't weighed down by past baggage, right? So those could be getting worked up around this time. Maybe we're seeing them, maybe we're not quite yet. I wouldn't be surprised if those are being worked on, or if the problems and the baggage of the old ideas are being worked out or ironed out in some frameworks that are getting worked on around this period of time, so that there can be something new and fresh and innovative in terms of ideas and beliefs and things like that that are coming up for us, say next year or so. And so many people throughout this time are going to also be looking for new forms of comfort and security, connection, merging, finding, again, new groupings, new tribes, things like that, new people to connect with kind of on a spiritual level. There may be more and new spiritual connection. Some people are probably going to feel that like the veil is thin throughout this period of time as well. And there could be some flashes of insight, intuition, downloads that wind up coming through due to that as well, that are going to be quite powerful for people. So there's this ability with this alignment to look at things from a distance, to detach oneself, especially with that Mercury Cazimi, where it's like heightened. And it's not like in the trenches, retrograde in Scorpio. It's Cazimi, which is pulled straight up from that. So being able to look at all of the things that are deep in the mind and looking at that from a detached perspective, right? So this can also drive up a lot of new intellectual fascinations, curiosities, memes, words, ways of expressing ourselves with each other that can make us feel like we're seen or like we're connected with each other. Maybe even make us feel a little bit more sane, with how we're coping with everything. And some interesting news stories and things like that. Surprises may come up, or surprising like ways of connecting with each other. Again, this could be just memes and social media stuff and those kinds of conversations that go on in the collective that wind up introducing questions or make us think differently. Again, that being those like new unencumbered ideas that are coming through, right? And things to think about that are not weighed down by all of the old gunk and stuff. So a lot of purification, rethinking on this collective scale. There's this kind of collective pause, reset. This Cazimi is giving a moment of really like laser sharp clarity in the broader confusion and delays and taking your time with things that can come through with this retrograde, right? Especially with regard to communication, governance, media, possibly even travel aspects coming through with this, diplomacy, agreements, and so forth. So in this moment, like right around this new moon, there can be this real critical or crucial realization or revelation that winds up emerging that offers a sense of a reset, like a before and after picture, basically, in narratives, possibly even in policy. And again, especially regarding those mercurial themes, media, tech, discourse, travel, etc. Maybe we even see the rise of like a new orator or something, the rise of a new public movement that has a new message as well. Again, this may be in the forefront, but it may be kind of getting cooked up during this time too. It's maybe like a breakthrough moment in the creation of something like that. So yeah, this just looks incredibly, so strangely powerful to me. And it's not all pluses. Like there's some yuckiness to this, but it just looks so potent and powerful. It looks like an opportunity for a huge potential turning point, especially when it comes to what it is that people know and cannot deny that they know, right? The knowledge and information and truth that can't be hidden from. So finally, speaking of this last alignment that winds up taking place with this Mercury retrograde, is the conjunction to Venus on the 25th of November when Mercury is still retrograde. So I should have put a little RX there. But this one's going to be a lot about connecting, because when Mercury and Venus come together, that is what they really highlight in each other. So there may be some real relief at this point. Again, we're getting to kind of the end of the rougher aspects of this, and now we're coming through with greater clarity into the rest of the alignments. We're on the other side of the retrograde. So there can be this kind of relief, or even like commiserating, connecting with people, again, feeling kind of more sane by being able to connect and exchange ideas and communicate with other people and create some level of understanding on a personal level. Now, there may also be a lot of desire or thinking about connections, what you want in them, past connections, how those went. Any sort of betrayals are going to be really poignant or potent around this time in our memory. And codependencies as well could become very apparent, whether they were issues that arose in the past or that we're still working through. And I would expect that there's going to be a really strong urge to reconnect, or there's going to be a lot of ruminating and reminiscing on old connections. So old conversations could be replaying, like unsent messages, unsent words, things that we meant to say to people could wind up resurfacing around this time too. And a desire to really understand motives and motivations. I think that there's a heightened desire, again, for that kind of closure around things that have happened in the past here. But again, just kind of keeping in mind that that's not always going to look the way that we want it to. And sometimes it's just important to be able to look at something for what it was and release it at that point, right? So there could be this overthinking aspect that winds up coming in romantic or social matters, possibly even to the point of like paranoia or jealousy or resentment that winds up resurfacing if there's been any like unhealed issues that wound up coming up as well. Emotional communication could potentially also be a bit misunderstood initially or come off a little bit more intense than intended. There is this ability, though, to be like really radically honest with oneself and with others, especially around issues of emotional manipulation, unspoken resentments, projections, things like that have taken place. So before, I would say, speaking or writing, making sure that you are really connected in with your own emotions and with your own perspective and where that might be subjective. So I would say if something winds up returning from the past, really ask if it's for a sense of healing, if it's for a sense of closure, if there's a potential like quote unquote karmic repetition that winds up coming through here. And if people seem a little bit more intense in their communications with you as well, try not to fear or react too strongly to that. That's just going to be kind of in the ether, right? So ultimately, going over past relationships, what worked, what didn't, what still kind of comes up for review repeatedly. You may even come into some sort of insight into why a connection worked or didn't work as well. And ultimately, hopefully, really reassessing what loyalty and connection winds up meaning to you, what you're wanting from that, what your priority is with that, and what you may need to work on internally in order to see that through. But yeah, so coming back to this general Mercury retrograde that we're dealing with, one thing is I checked the Sabian symbol of where it is going direct, and it stood out to me that it said, obeying their conscience, a soldier resists orders. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I don't know if we're going to see something like that, but there's this ability on the other side of this retrograde to really see current matters from a more thorough and understanding position and framework. A lot of people are going to be realizing certain things are or are not true that they may have believed or disbelieved previously. And moving forward, this is about thinking more clearly, seeing things for what they truly are, the pluses and the minuses of that, and understanding better how to move forward in a more sustainable and a more reasonable mindset and manner, right? So there have been a lot of revelations throughout this period of time, going forward from when I'm publishing this, but during that retrograde, about how people can stir up fear in each other and reactiveness in each other and in themselves, and the poor decision making that can wind up coming from those fears that we stir up in each other, and how fear-based belief systems can wind up impacting us as well, has also really been under review throughout that period of time. So hopefully through that process, we've learned about the need to find balance and security internally before seeking it externally, or by trying to create it and enforce our type of security upon the world, right? Or framing the world around our own sense of a desire for security. And if it can't be found externally at times, how to find it internally as well, that our own internal balance and security and peace. So yeah, that I think is what I have for the Mercury retrograde. So, with all of that said, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate you being here. And if you don't mind hitting the thumbs up button, I would greatly appreciate that as well. It helps the video to spread around. And do consider sticking around for future videos like this by subscribing. I would love to have you here. And thank you so much to the members of this channel for your support. Thank you so much to Angel Niblock, Bell Howell, JJ, Deborah Keel Leavitt, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Maria Cyril Hyro, Rachel Windholtz, The Z-Man 1291, Aya, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, The Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Dali Gizi, Mango JT, E Love, Grace, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Jonathan Mason, Chad Wiseman, Ezekiel David LaRosa, Adrian K, Astrology Party, On the Road, SP, Karen, Teresa Jones, Seda Tapkuoglu, Sherry Leas, Horse Dog Dog Notebook, Justice League Pie, Nioke Beam, Ashley Gonzalez, Create, Surinder Rao, Gales, Tarot and Astrology, Talitha McKenzie, JY0123, K from NH, Denise Zanin, Pitar Music, Pat K, Travis Dandro, Nancy Imhoff, Sunny, Angela Lazaire, Sarah M. Cap, Peta Carlin, and Jay Bevan. Thank you all so much for your support. Much love to you. And if you are interested in membership perks and stuff like that, there is information in the description box below. And other than all of that, let's go ahead and get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have the Mercury retrograde taking place between your 9th and 8th houses. So this is kind of higher mind, complex information areas, basically. So matters of truth, matters of trust, belief, dependency are likely to be kind of weaving into some of the narratives that are getting reviewed around this period of time. So looking at those matters, you're likely to encounter some experiences that cause you to rethink these things, that cause you to maybe reevaluate how it is that you trust and why, and whether you're comfortable with that, whether you want to realign that basically with your sense of belief. So are your beliefs out of sync with your experience of connecting with other people, right? So do you feel like you value trust quite a bit, but that you might not have a lot of connections where you feel like you're able to lean into that, or have your beliefs changed even maybe a bit subconsciously due to some experiences that you've had trusting other people, things like this. So there is this financial aspect to these alignments as well. And part of the dependency that's implied here could be financial or material in some way as well. Maybe something about contracts or agreements or things like this. And I know this is a term that we don't usually love to hear, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are some financial surprises that wind up cropping up. It's not necessarily good or bad, but with the alignment, the opposition with Uranus in your second house, that could certainly be a thing, and just causing you to rethink matters of inflow and outflow, potentially debts or things like that, information around that. And this could have something to do with travel. It could have something to do with education. It could have something to do with expanding your horizons and your investment in that. Maybe that's something that you've been considering, and taking courses or something like this, traveling, something along those lines. I would recommend thinking that throughout this period of time, maybe not hopping on it at the first impulse to do so, but thinking it through, doing some research around that, doing some research maybe around affordability of things that you're wanting to get into that are fascinating for you. Maybe there is a longer term, a move far away that you're thinking about, and you're looking at your financial situation and seeing if that looks like it's going to be possible. And maybe that's even a longer term kind of a thing where you would need to set yourself up in a more nomadic way, or set yourself up with a job or something on the other side of a move. But I would definitely recommend thinking that through and doing some research around that. So additionally, when it comes to this kind of higher mind area of the chart up here, also very likely philosophical, this going into truth aspects, right? Ideological, possibly even political views and how you express them. There's this like outflow aspect of the ninth house where we're sharing our knowledge and we're putting it out there. Maybe there's a reconsideration around how you do that or what it is that you're saying or even what it is that you're believing, right? And so that can cause you then to go more within. Maybe there are some philosophical aspects that you are thinking through on a more esoteric kind of a level. So what are your beliefs about the world? And then what are the underlying, even like cosmological underpinnings to how you feel like the world and our experiences wind up playing out, right? So this winds up going into spiritual considerations from the philosophical and experimenting along those lines, being open to different kinds of perspectives that are, again, potentially fascinating you. This is also an area of like tickling the mind with things that you're wanting to dig into. And this could wind up even turning into some revelations, maybe even revelation around secrets or revelations coming to you, dawning realizations around experiences that you've had, whether it be with other people or with philosophies or belief systems or dependencies, right? So do you look to others to affirm or confirm your beliefs? Do you look to others for permission? Do you tend to kind of stay a bit small until you feel like there's some kind of a green light around that? Reconsidering all of these different things and maybe even where some of those things stem from. Maybe you have grown in certain directions and it's been treated as kind of strange or out there or whatever, and it caused you to maybe not speak as much or maybe not express as much your beliefs and so on. So tying in that expressive aspect of the ninth house as well. So just kind of considering where are the constraints? Where do you feel like things are out of alignment in these more like philosophical, psychological, spiritual areas of life? Where do you feel held back? And potentially even material aspects as well. Though with those, it's, I think, more along the lines of figuring out how to align that better with what it is that you're wanting, where it is that you feel like your truth is, right? But yeah, I think that's a lot of what I have for you, Aries. So I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Taurus, we have Mercury retrograde transiting between your 8th and 7th houses. So this is pretty straightforward for you. This is going to be about partnerships and commitments, agreements, things like this. Your plans with others, matters of trust and dependency within relationships, as well as potentially even financial entanglements with other people that are getting stirred up and getting thought through. So rethinking your commitments, rethinking your partnerships. Maybe you are wanting to reshape those in some way or do those a little bit differently. Maybe you are realizing that you're kind of giving away power in a sense, or that you have had a lot of relationships maybe fizzle out recently, and this is something you're wanting to connect with again, is being able to kind of tie your energy in with other people and feel more connected. Especially with Uranus having been in your first house for so long, this may have had a lot of the focus on you and the changes that you're making and so on. And that can cause some people to fall away if they are not aligned with the new direction that you've been going in. So this could have you desiring to connect again or thinking about connecting again with new groups of people who are more on the path that you're on at this point. So there could also be a lot of conversations and plans getting sorted out with other people as well. And, you know, I would definitely caution about misunderstandings or miscommunications. You may need to go over these plans again as well. That's a thing that can often come up with Mercury retrogrades. You may even wind up having some funky experiences of conversing with people or listening to people and just having the sense of like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, I cannot resonate at all with what it is that you're talking about. So that might be kind of a funky experience that you wind up having here. And that may actually wind up causing some sense of revelation with this last pass of Uranus through your first house, of recognizing where you're at this point. And maybe, again, you're not on the same page with some of the people that you've been connected with for a while. Also, the concept of relationships winds up coming in with the seventh house as well. So like, how do you approach relationships? How do you approach trust? How do you approach dependencies and connections with others? So do you tend to overgive? Are you now cautious? Like, did you recognize that and become somewhat guarded and maybe step back from a lot of connections due to that? There's this rethinking process, looking back on where some triggers have been, where some things have maybe gotten a little bit out of sorts, and how you can approach your connections with other people in a way that's going to be more emotionally satisfying to you. And with the eighth house aspect here, there can be material or like cost benefit analyses that wind up going in here. I should have put that in plural, but yeah, there can be like this kind of cost benefit analysis as well that can wind up playing into your reconsiderations of some connections as well. Is there a connection that you have? Maybe it's just very draining. Do you have a connection that you have where you're noticing, wow, this person tends to be very supportive of me and they don't usually seem to need a lot, and maybe I want to kind of go out of my way to say thank you, or is there anything that you're needing? Things like this. So trying to bring some sense of balance into your connections as well. I'm just trying to think of what else. One thing, you could be also discussing with some people around you the changes that you have gone through, and that could be helpful to cause other people to rethink as well. Because we do have that little rethinker Mercury out there in the seventh house, which can be other people. And it's talking directly to the Uranus that's been going through your first house for several years now. So what you are saying about the changes that you've experienced could wind up having a pretty profound impact on the thinking of others, basically, as well. So I wouldn't be shy about, thinking, oh, well, everyone knows this or whatever. I personally do that quite a bit. And it's surprising what we haven't thought of and what other people haven't thought of. And just by the particularities of the experiences that we've had in the order that we've had them. And so you may be able to really help someone or be something of a guiding light to someone who is going through a period maybe of transition or transformation around this period of time as well. So yeah, I wouldn't shy away from that either. But yeah, I think that is most of what I have for you, Taurus. So I hope this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have Mercury retrograde transiting between your seventh and your sixth house. So this has a lot to do with other people and your sense of service to them. So you may be rethinking a bit how you connect with others energetically. So do you feel like you put a lot of particular energy out to other people? Do you feel like you get that back from those that you're connecting to as well? Are there a lot of people around you who have been vulnerable and kind of needing a lot? And is there a sense of satisfaction that you get out of that? Or do you wind up feeling kind of drained when you connect with people who are, in a difficult spot? Thinking that through and not having to go into these areas of, is this selfish or something along those lines? The usual framing that you wind up putting that into. This is trying to look at that quite a bit differently. So again, what are the energetic exchanges that you have with other people? How do you feel like you are of service to others? Maybe you feel like that's been kind of falling short recently, like you haven't really been able to connect and be of service to others recently, and that's something that you're wanting to create in your life again, maybe through mentoring or charity or volunteering or something like this, reaching out to people. There could even be something there around if you need help, reaching out to other people for help as well. And maybe that is something that you're kind of needing to rethink in terms of whether that's something that you're usually comfortable doing or not. Now, this also does have to do, especially the sixth house, with your routine, your workday, your habits, and so forth. But it is pulling in those elements of other people. So do you feel like you tend to get distracted? Do you maybe need to like put your phone on do not disturb more often or something like this? Do you want to bring more connections into your routine, your habits? Do you want to involve connecting with people more into your everyday life? Do you feel like there's some sort of social aspect that's been lacking in your day to day? Looking that over, seeing how you feel about that. With this Mercury retrograde, the way that it's lined up, I would really recommend looking at the roots of that as well. Where's that stemming from? When did that start? When did things seem to get a little bit out of whack there? Was there a heavy prioritization of work or something like that? Not to look for faults, but just to look at that and be able to glean some lessons from it at least, as well as you hopefully are able to reconnect more. This is also a place of health, the sixth house. And because there's that Mercury is coming from the seventh back down into the sixth, you may be encountering some helpful information regarding health from other people. So, of course, always cautioning about sources and so forth, but you may just be hearing something from someone that you wind up experimenting with a bit and find that it has a really wonderful impact on your health or something. And therefore you wind up looking at maybe your bodily function or balance or whatever that winds up having a really long-term effect, especially the way that this Mercury is tied into Jupiter and Saturn. Some of the decisions that we're making that look like day-to-day kinds of changes could wind up having a really profound impact even on your ability to like show up in the world and your sense of security and stability, with those two, Jupiter and Saturn, being in your second and your 10th houses. But yeah, this is a very productive area as well. So matters of collaboration, working together with other people, if that's something that you tend to do quite a bit, you may be rethinking the structure of that, rethinking those relationships, and maybe how people are relating to others. Is there a kind of reluctance in it? How can that be stirred up so that it feels maybe a little bit less like work and feels more like you're able to share some level of creativity with other people? This can be coworkers, employees, partners, business partners as well would be a really strong signification. So how is it that you collaborate together? Have there been any bumps that can be ironed out? This Mercury retrograde, if you're discussing that or you're trying to sort it out, there could totally be miscommunications, weird, not being on the same page, and that being a little bit frustrating when it comes to the actual work and routines and getting things done. But I would not be shy to look for some lessons in that as well around how to communicate with each other more clearly. Is everyone clear on how they fit into the broader collaboration, right? Is there a renegotiation that needs to be done in a partnership or a coworker or employee connection as well? Do you need to ask for help more? Do you need to delegate more? Is that something you're not super comfortable with? That would be one of those asking for help, and that may be being outside of a comfort zone. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Gemini. So I hope this Mercury retrograde treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have Mercury retrograde running between your 6th and 5th houses. So this is combining a place of routine and productivity and work and health, day-to-day life, with the place of creativity and expression and joy and pleasure, things like this. So there's probably a lesson here around how to make your day-to-day life more enjoyable or more pleasurable, how you're able to infuse some more creativity or playfulness into your day-to-day life, and reprioritizing that. So if you've been all work and no play recently, this is going to come up and it's going to point that out to you. So getting kind of ahead of that might even be a bit wise, because I wouldn't be surprised if this is the kind of thing that would kind of stop you in your tracks, where it's like, no, go out, go have fun, go do something, change something up. Also, if you've been dealing with burnout, this is an antidote to that. This is interesting. This could really help you to look at that from multiple different angles and then really address it in a way that it has staying power, because it's aligned in this grand trine to Jupiter in your first house and Saturn up in your ninth. So there is some staying power to the apparently small decisions that we're making and the small apparent changes that we're making throughout this period of time. They have some real staying power. So yeah, if burnout has been an issue at all, I would definitely recommend leaning into this Mercury retrograde and utilizing it to dig into that, to look at that, maybe look at the root of that. When did that start? This is also really helpful for the development of crafts and skills. That is a bit of an overlap that these houses have, is your skill set and quote unquote like craft. So creativity and productivity winds up taking place in these two houses. So looking at that, looking at the level of your craft, the level of your skill, if you're wanting to upskill, if you're wanting to bring something else in, this offers you an opportunity to think that through. If you haven't decided quite yet which direction you're wanting to grow in, I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, experimentation can be useful here. So I wouldn't really recommend one way or the other, whether you just jump on things. That can also be helpful in terms of, oh, I'm inspired to look in this direction and maybe even go full steam in that direction. And then if you do wind up reversing course and going with something else, I mean, maybe you're more aware of the downsides of experimentation in your given circumstance, but I wouldn't be shy about kind of thrusting out in different directions if there's not much of a downside there. Also, there could be a good improvement of health. The fifth house tends to be a very positive one. Sixth house can be complicated, and it can speak to health issues and things like that. So this would probably be burnout related if like the health themes are coming in. You may be like, okay, I'm not a doctor, but for instance, if you are dealing with low energy or exhaustion or something, and you have looked at this from a purely like chemical health kind of perspective quite a bit, and you've tried to sort it out, it might just be more of a spirit thing, more of a heart thing, in terms of, are you having enough fun? Are you recharging enough? Are you allowing for your inner child to play at times? It could just be a burnout thing. It could be an issue around holding back your creative expression or deprioritizing your creativity or your pleasure, things like that. So I would really recommend looking at it from that angle. But again, I'm not a doctor. So also potentially working through a health regimen or kids' schedules. The fifth house can also be your kids, the sixth house, their schedules as they are interacting with yours. So working through that, looking at that from different angles. There could be also looking at this in a more traditional health way. This could be discovering or looking for and discovering. So always recommending to get ahead of these transits by, putting yourself out there a little bit with finding maybe an exercise thing or a health regimen or something like that doesn't feel too confining, right? Something that's actually going to work, something that you're actually able to stick with, and not something that feels like a punishment or like you are denying yourself something. And yeah, if you have kids, their schedules may just be interfering with yours quite a bit. You may need to reprioritize and resort that out, reorganize that. There may even be something here about needing to play with the prioritization of your work and your children. But yeah, again, this just speaks to enjoyment of work, productivity, collaborating with people, being of service to people, feeling like you're able to care for others as well. There's this really heart-centered aspect of the fifth house that can come in here, as well as creative collaborations with other people. So if that's been something that you're interested in pursuing, like maybe on a community level, that Mercury going retrograde, it will oppose Uranus doing its last pass through your 11th house. So this could definitely also speak to like affinity groups or groups that you enjoy connecting with creatively, and then doing something productive with them as well, like creatively, enjoyably productive. Even collaborations with colleagues, that winds up playing into this quite a bit. Your relationships with your colleagues may benefit quite a bit from this retrograde. Now, there can also be, whenever we're looking at any group of people that's involved with the Mercury retrograde at all, there can be miscommunications, there can be like misunderstandings and not being on the same page and so forth. So, paying attention to that, I think, is going to be helpful, and trying to just kind of let that slide. If there are miscommunications, try not to get too frustrated, try to be pretty patient with people. But those relationships should go over pretty well, especially if you're trying to look at them from these more positive, how do we get the best out of these connections kind of way too. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer. So I hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have Mercury retrograde transiting between your fifth and your fourth houses. So this does have a lot of overlap when it comes to matters of family. The fourth house can speak directly to your roots, your parents, your home, your family, where you're living. And the fifth house has to do with creativity, creative expression, etc., enjoyment, pleasure, but there is also children there. So if you have a family that is a big part of your life, this is likely to be speaking quite directly to that. And I would very much expect for this to be something that you're experiencing with family. So this may require some kind of reframing. This is tied into these kind of etheric other houses through this grand trine with Jupiter and Saturn to your eighth and your 12th. And matters of family like roots and patterns and conditioning and so on can wind up coming through with that. So it may be like these kind of deeper underlying currents and so forth that wind up going on with your family that you're rethinking on a deeper level. Maybe this isn't something that you are directly addressing with family members. Maybe it is. If you do wind up approaching family in that way, do keep in mind this is Mercury retrograde. There can be misunderstandings, miscommunications. Things can come off a lot more intense than we are intending for them to, in terms of how we're communicating our needs or things like this. So reframing that internally, I think is going to be really helpful to, like, turn that jewel basically of your family, your roots, ancestral patterns, and so on and so forth. You may even look at this as like your karmic roots and so forth. But there's this kind of shifting of priorities and being able to look at the impact of your family and your lineage and your roots, where you come from, even the stories that you tell yourself about where you come from, by really digging into that. Now, again, like I said, if you do address this with family, there may be some misunderstandings and so forth, but it could also be really helpful. So if you and your family are kind of safe to discuss these things, if this isn't some like daunting, big, dramatic thing that there's like family complications and toxic stuff or anything like that, if you're able to just kind of discuss these, reprioritizations that you're feeling like you need to make, or these insights that you're getting around family dynamics and things like that, that may be really helpful. In the States, where a lot of people on this channel are from, this is going to be right in the middle of the holiday season. So keep that in mind. If you are getting together with family, for Halloween and Thanksgiving and so forth, this could definitely wind up turning into some misunderstandings with family. So again, I would just kind of preach patience, and it may even be wise for you to preach patience to your family. This Mercury isn't going direct even until the 29th of November. So something to keep in mind. Also, when it comes to matters of your inner child, that is also an overlapping kind of a theme that we have here. Again, the origin story, your childhood, your parents, your roots, where you come from, etc. in the fourth house. The fifth house speaks very directly to that inner child, that pleasure, creativity, joyful aspect of ourselves that sometimes we can stifle a bit for the, needing to be responsible, etc. But working through that, again, looking at that inner child in different ways, looking at your childhood and those significant moments that had a really strong impact on you, for better or worse, or, even if you don't want to frame it in those kinds of terms, looking at that, I think that a lot of this is going to be pretty internal. This is Scorpio. It's going to be a lot of just kind of revisioning, reprioritizing, reframing, re-narrativizing around any sort of issues that we're encountering. I think that this Mercury retrograde, it is going to cause, that, like I said, the miscommunications and misunderstandings and things like that. But I really think it's more of this, internal realignment and reframing of things. So how can you allow for your inner child to be more of a priority? And if you even tense up around that kind of a perspective, that probably one would indicate maybe you should kind of reprioritize it a bit. Maybe you have children and you're able to connect with them in that way a little bit more. Things like this. I think you get it. So yeah, also with the fifth house, there is this kind of beautification, pleasure, joy aspect of it as well. This is where Venus rejoices, is in the fifth house. And so there may be this desire to do this beautification, redecorating, reorganizing your home space. Maybe you're hosting, or maybe you are just encountering a lot of material or social media stuff about people decorating for the holidays, and you're getting ideas about just in general how you're wanting to redecorate your home. Or you're just feeling like the energy is shifting. Maybe you have changed internally quite a bit and you're wanting to clear the energy. Maybe you are wanting to rearrange. Sometimes that is something that I really love to do when I feel like the energy is a little bit stagnant. I will try and rearrange. Maybe you are getting into like feng shui and looking at how that kind of pleasure principle can be better supported within your home space, things like this. I think that would be a really wonderful way if you feel like there's any caught up energy, or if you feel like it's getting a little bit weighty, to actively engage with your home space, your physical space, to make it more comfortable and more joyful and more pleasurable for you to be there. Also really making space for creativity. So that may be literal space. This could even be reorganizing so that you're able to reprioritize a creative hobby or something like this that you want to get back into. All these retrogrades, that could definitely be a thing of something that you have set aside for some time and you are engaging with again, or that you are wanting to internalize and wanting to make more of a priority, that creative aspect of yourself, and giving it an outlet, probably within your home space as well. Yeah, like I said, planning, hosting events, and there could be a redecorating, reorganizing, beautification kind of a thing there. Again, if you are planning any events with other people, double checking that you're on the same page about who's responsible for what, because there's probably going to be some miscommunications and maybe someone dropping a ball somewhere. So again, if that happens, just keeping in mind, it's just an event, it's just a party, whatever, if there's no whipped cream, like no one's going to die. So just being as sensitive to those little misunderstandings and things, I think is going to be best. And yeah, just when it comes to resources as well, what are with the fifth house, this is a succedent house. So it does speak to the resources that are derived from or which support the preceding house. So we do have that kind of succedent angular supportive alignment here. So what are the resources of your home and your family? You may be considering that. You may be reorganizing that. Maybe there's a budgeting kind of an aspect of this that could make sense with Saturn up in your eighth. There's not a huge amount. I mean, the eclipses have been taking place in your second and eighth houses. So yeah, that may well wind up playing in of like financial resources, but this could even be energetic resources. Or how is it that you are connecting with each other? Like, is everyone drained? Right? Like, does it feel like your whole family is just kind of like that the energetic resources, or that the like pleasure or creative resources are kind of dampened? And are you able to reprioritize that in a way? Are you able to make some time, again, maybe with the holidays coming up, low pressure holidays, and recharging throughout that vacation time, right? If you do have time off of work, things like that. And yeah, really just looking at those resources that you're sharing with each other. Yeah, I think that's a lot of what I have for you, Leo. So it's a pretty nice alignment for you, and I hope it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have Mercury retrograde transiting between your fourth and third houses. So this has a lot to do with family, home, community, your local space, so your city, right? And the people, places, things around you, and where you and your home fit into that. So there could be a lot of planning around events in your community, in your home, with your family. This would be more along the lines of extended family. So maybe you were planning holidays or something like that, planning events. And that could be taking up quite a bit of your like energy, basically your energetic resources. This is connecting more into your social houses, your third, seventh, 11th, through Saturn and Jupiter. So maybe you are even planning something that looks like it's just an event, but it winds up kicking off a kind of social connection or social connectivity or a greater sense of community that's actually going to wind up sticking with you for some time. So even if you are planning an event and the standard Mercury retrograde stuff comes in where there's a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding and maybe some things not quite getting finished or whatever, the event, the purpose, the meaning behind the event may not be the event itself. It may be a matter of reprioritizing your community connections, your social connections. And so maybe not taking that one-off experience too terribly seriously, but rather looking at it as, well, this is just an opportunity to connect with people more and to, again, reprioritize that. With that retrograde coming from your fourth house, which has to do with your home and your private life, back out into the community, back out into the third house. This may even be speaking to a longer term habit or period of a lot of introspection, a lot of introversion, and spending a lot of time alone. So you may be rethinking need for that. Maybe there was a wonderful reason for that. Maybe you needed to take some time out for like spiritual introspection, personal growth and development, etc. Maybe you were dealing with some family concerns and so forth, but maybe now you're feeling like, you know what, I feel a bit cloistered. I want to get back out into the world. And I would definitely recommend that with this alignment. There may be some hiccups, there may be some little bumps in the road that wind up coming with that, but it's definitely what this would be calling for. So conversations also about events, community, home, family, things like this, those matters may require revisiting, rethinking. So I've covered some of that on the more abstract aspect of like getting back out into the world. If you feel like you've been spending a lot of time alone or solo or whatever, or maybe prioritizing family stuff and now wanting to connect more with friends and colleagues and so on. But like I said, it's tied into a longer term thing. That's part of why I'm not stressing so much about the whole, oh, if you make a decision in the beginning of this, you're going to wind up redoing it when the Mercury goes direct. With this grand trine that this Mercury is making 3 times with Jupiter and Saturn, I think this is speaking more to not just what's going on during this Mercury retrograde. It's deeper into the past in terms of significance, and it's deeper into the future in terms of what you're kind of crystallizing or creating or reprioritizing with this Mercury retrograde. So this may really require looking at how you socialize, how you connect with people socially. Has that felt a bit daunting recently, perhaps especially since 2023 with Saturn having been in your 7th house? Maybe instead of looking at connecting with other people as a drain on your emotional or social resources, you should look at it as that you are able to exchange energy with others and you're able to get some kind of fresh perspectives and something to get kind of excited about again. Also, reviewing those extended family connections and peer relationships, community relationships. If you have been introspective for a while, looking at the root of that could also be really helpful. So if you've had a weird experience with people before, and maybe that caused you to pull back, or maybe you feel kind of like judged by the outside, could also definitely be a thing. If you feel like you've had to like prove yourself, et cetera, anything like that, really looking at the roots of that and reviewing that, doing a lot of introspection around why it may be that you would feel that connecting with other people could be a difficult kind of an experience, so that you're able to connect again, especially with groups and broader communities. Like Saturn is out here in the one-on-one connections house. Jupiter is exalted up in your 11th house of group connections and more like out in the world, worldly connections. And then Mercury is retrograding and bringing up matters of your local community and the people, places, things around you, generally speaking. So maybe it is that you should look at those lighter hearted, less intense kinds of connections for a reintroduction of becoming more social or more socially involved, if that's been an issue for you at all. Now, the third house also has to do with organizing things, organizing your day-to-day experiences. It can also have to do with technologies and communication and things like this. So you may be bringing that into the home or rethinking your relationship with that in your home. Maybe if you tend to take your work home with you, if you are accessible at home, that may be something that you are rethinking in terms of your working life. Or maybe you're just kind of optimizing your home space so that you feel like you're able to kind of get things done more effectively, more efficiently, basically. But yeah, I think that that is a lot of what I have for you, Virgo. So I do hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have Mercury retrograde running between your third and second houses. So this does have quite a bit to do with your financial, material resources, your values, as well as financial planning. So you may very well be rethinking, reprioritizing budgets, inflows and outflows, and trying to get some sense of like having your head wrapped more around that. And so there may be some pressure there. There may be something that's going on. We do have the opposition with Uranus in your 8th house of outflows and things like that. Now, there can be some financial surprises there. I wouldn't freak out about that. It's only one potential indicator there. But I will say that just making sure that you're really clear on where those inflows and outflows are going and that you feel like your genuine personal priorities, your genuine personal values around what is really contributing to your quality of life and what is really a responsibility and a priority of yours, that is getting served by your budget as well. So there may be something coming up there. There may be something that kind of stirs that up in you, but it wouldn't hurt to just kind of get ahead of this transit as well by looking through all of those different things and trying to, again, frame it in a way that you're able to understand on a kind of daily basis with the third house involvement there. There may even be something here about technologies or travel, your connections with community as well. And this could be tied into your finances, certainly. So expenses along those lines. But it may also just be a matter of questioning whether, for instance, when it comes to community, do your values align there? Are you taking on the values and the opinions of those around you and reflecting those out? Do you feel like you're on the same page in terms of your values and your perspectives even, and those around you? There may even be some questions there about the balance of like give and take when it comes to connections like that as well. Also, your skills, your talents, especially where you have to like learn those things, those could also really be coming up for review or reconsideration. Maybe you're wanting to upskill and you're trying to figure out which direction do I want to go with that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend feeling like you need to jump on the first thing or the first opportunity there, but really rethinking that and researching that, digging into that a bit, what feels right, what feels aligned with your values should perhaps be a really significant aspect of consideration within that. And also the value of your resources, your skills, your talents. Do you feel like that's being respected? Do you feel like you are getting your due even in your working life? So we do have this Grand Trine that is built up between this Mercury retrograde and then Jupiter in your 10th house of career and public standing, recognition, and so forth. And then your 6th house, which can have to do with your working life and your productivity and so forth. So do you feel like you are really being compensated correctly? Let me put it that way, for the effort and the time and the energy and the good attitude that you bring into your work. It might not be, I hate to say, during the actual retrograde, which goes until about the 29th of November, You may get the runaround if you try to get a raise or a delay. There could be a delay with it. It may be best to wait until that Mercury winds up going direct if that is specifically something that you're wanting to do. And there may even be an aspect here of wanting to be more independent. So if you are recognizing the value of your skills and your abilities, your talents, and what you're bringing to the table, but maybe you feel like there's something weird with the compensation there, you may be looking at those budgets. You may be reprioritizing and rethinking that under the perspective of, I want to go more independent. So maybe you are trying to save up to give yourself more space, or you're trying to figure out where you can create space in your life as it is to pursue something a little bit more independent, where maybe you feel like your values are more aligned with the work that you're doing, or that the value that is being placed upon you is more in alignment with what it is that you're bringing to the table. But yeah, ultimately, this is going to be really big around your plans and your values, possibly even like, again, your opinions and your community, and whether you are internalizing some things from other people, what's not yours to have to take on, especially, again, when it comes to opinions and values and things like this. You shouldn't feel the need to defend other people and what they do and take that on. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to discuss with you. So yeah, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have Mercury retrograde transiting between your second and your first houses. So for you, this is very much personal. It's about you. It's about your self-image, your values, how you see yourself, your prioritization of yourself. So there's likely to be a lot of thinking back through that whole area. So anything that has been kind of holding you back or having you feel small, anything that has been restricting or interrupting your sense of being at peace with yourself, feeling whole within yourself, feeling like you're really able to be yourself, should become quite apparent during this period of time. And it's going to be calling on you to reprioritize yourself, your own needs, your own considerations. You've had Uranus out in your seventh house for quite some time out here. And this is going to be running across and kind of opposing that and bringing the focus back to you, back to yourself. So that would be a big part of the lesson. There would be a need to prioritize yourself, especially, again, the specifically like interruptions from other people and how people can kind of throw off your energy and things like that. Looking at that, especially if that comes up as an experience under this influence, it's coming up so that you can think that through, look at the root of that, and then try and bring your focus, your attention, your priority back to your sense of self and personal development. And doing that throughout this time, it may seem like a small thing. It may seem like once in a series of trying to work through these things as human beings. You know, we're always kind of running into these issues, but the way that this is lined up with Saturn in your fifth house and Jupiter in your ninth house, it does indicate that there's a bigger thing that's going on with this, that this might be speaking to roots of those matters, maybe a porousness or something like this when it comes to other people and the impact that they can have on you, the influence that they can have on you, that goes back a bit more, and that the decisions, the choices that you're making, the thinking this through, the introverting and introspection that you're doing around these issues throughout this period of time is likely then to also have a longer term impact in terms of real staying power to the developments and choices that you're making now, as opposed to, again, the way that we tend to go through this. Maybe I should just speak for myself as like a Gemini rising, but, you know, going through and being like, yeah, no, cool, I get it, I'm good. And then needing to go back through that like month after month after month and things like that. So this looks like it has a little bit more staying power in terms of the lessons that it's bringing through. And yeah, just developing a sense of a lot more trust in yourself, self-assurance, self-reliance, not needing to look so much outside of yourself for some sense of assurance, basically confirmation, permission, to be who you are, right? Not needing to look for that approval outside of yourself. Are you good with where you're at? Are you comfortable with your level of development? If that answer is remotely no, you definitely shouldn't feel bad about that, but just then give yourself full permission to grow in the directions that you're wanting to grow in, and to reach for the creative instincts, the inspiration, the fascination that really is yours. Leaning fully into that, I think, is going to be really helpful with this as well. And yeah, just a real personal recognition of, if you were starting, like, if there are any questions for you around where you end, where others begin, the influence that people have had on you, which we all influence each other. There's definitely nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking for where to find an edge to pull at there, to figure out where those lines are, and to give yourself the ability to feel like you really are developing yourself, and not developing upon something that you're valuing outside of yourself. Looking at your values and your convictions, what are these things that you stand upon? What is like at the root of that? What is a no-go for you? Maybe like, maybe even just getting into the nitty-gritty of these insistences that you as a fixed sign can definitely have, like those convictions. What is a necessity? What is not okay, right? So looking for that, and then looking at the root of that. What is that, like extrapolating from that? What does that say about who you are? And how can you then develop a greater sense of feeling like you're growing, feeling like you're developing, feeling like you're thriving out of that point of who you are at your core? And that then allowing for you to really tap into this grand trine, which is running between your first and fifth and ninth houses, which is really beautiful and wonderful. And you should definitely be tapping into that through this time. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So I hope that this retrograde treats you really well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have the Mercury retrograde running between your first and 12th houses. So this is quite fascinating. This is very fundamentally personal for you, and it's speaking to your forward-facing persona, the way that you see yourself, the way that other people see you, how you approach the world, your, like, who it is that you are and that you feel like you are becoming, as well as your subconscious and your kind of psychological and emotional and spiritual depths as well. So what's going on under the surface and what's going on the surface. So this is running between those places, and it's likely to put you very much in touch with, one, even the less conscious energies that you give off to yourself and to others, right? So even the aspects of your first house self, you, yourself, your personality, etc., that you carry with you, you may be deepening your understanding of that, deepening your understanding of how that's working for you, maybe how it's getting in the way, and things like that, and where maybe you put on a mask for people as well. Sometimes it's really hard to see that we do wear a mask sometimes. But the fact that that Mercury is running across that first and 12th house cusp for you would definitely indicate to me that you're coming into a fuller understanding of that. Now, additionally, then, what this is going to be doing is kind of the converse, which is putting you more consciously in touch with what's going on under the surface for you as well. So any sort of like conditioning or these underlying expectations that we can carry, the psychological patterns that we get into, the emotional patterns, the spiritual patterns that we wind up getting into, that which goes under the surface for us and that we don't always directly engage with, but is always definitely there. So putting your conscious mind more in touch with that, and also then the effects of that and the ramifications of that, the consequences of all of that that's going on under the surface for you and your life and who you feel like you're able to be. So this could even be tied into, with this water grand trine here, family conditioning and patterns from family. So this may go way back, and this is one thing that I'm trying to emphasize with people, is that the fact that this is tied into Jupiter and Saturn indicates to me that it's not just a matter, this Mercury retrograde isn't just about Oh, you may, if you make a decision early on in this Mercury retrograde process, you may do an about face on it later in the Mercury retrograde process. I feel like the timetable that we're dealing with here isn't just some weeks. I think that this is actually tapping into something much older in us and also having a lot more staying power in terms of the impact that we can have. So it's actually a very fruitful kind of a transit for you because you are able to impact yourself deeply with the choices that you're making right now. It's not just these kinds of one-off and then running into the same issue in a couple of months kind of a thing as well. So what this is bringing you back to is this reprioritization of yourself in terms of your personal well-being, these emotional aspects of yourself, taking the time to look at how you've been conditioned, what your expectations are, and trying to heal around that, trying to make that healthier and more effective for you, make it something that you're able to work with in a more positive way. And again, the realization around the conditioning and expectations is, I think, going to be really quite profound here, and making decisions based on that as well. So, with that in mind, what are some ways that you can heal this? With that in mind, what are some ways that you can expand out of that and call into question the roots of that? So, really giving you some wonderful insights into your psyche, what makes you who you are, what makes you unique, what is going on for you personally under the surface. So, not feeling the need to just kind of, again, skate along the surface of life and just get things done and all of this kind of stuff that we do in the day to day and, trying to put on your best face or anything. This is about taking time out to go into the depths of that and look into your own psyche. What is it that makes you who you are? Also, a real opportunity for the development of your spiritual life, your spiritual connection. So, if you've been working on your intuition, if you've been working on any sort of ancestral work, this is super wonderful for tapping into that and developing along those lines, and potentially even organizing that. These are like Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn that you're dealing with here, not to mention that Uranus out in your sixth house. These are energies that can pull things into a sense of order. So ordering that, like the decisions, the habits that you create now, spiritually speaking, are likely to really stick with you for a while. So if that's something that you've had trouble getting off the ground, like a meditation practice or an energetic like cleansing practice or something like that, if you've been wanting to get into divination but you haven't quite stuck with it, this would be a really good time to really try and get into that habit and that routine because it's likely to stick a lot more and feel a lot more profound. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius. So I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have this Mercury retrograde running between your 12th and 11th houses. So this is pretty fascinating. The 12th house, relative to the 11th house, is a pretty private place. It is a place of intentional or unintentional isolation and time spent alone, time spent internally. This is like the place of your inner world, very imaginative, very spiritual, very liminal kind of a space. Whereas the 11th house is very social. It speaks to social groups, it speaks to your social aspirations, colleagues, things like this. So you may find that there's a need to reprioritize along these lines. So rebalancing your social connection and your personal time. If you've been placing priority or an emphasis on one or the other, that is very likely to be called into question. So if you've been doing a lot of personal development and haven't been socializing quite as much, then this would be calling on you to spend some more time just in kind of lighthearted connection with other people, kind of getting out there again a bit. If you've been doing that a lot and you've been feeling that like sense of responsibility to always be available, and even if it's not always, just being available a lot, and you've been maybe even feeling kind of socially drained, maybe you're naturally introverted, maybe you are an INFJ type, me that is capable of doing the social thing, but then do really wind up feeling quite drained. This could speak to needing to recharge and needing to rebalance and reprioritize around all of this. And especially where any sort of people pleasing aspects of this wind up coming in. There is also this opposition from that Mercury retrograde to Uranus, which is in your fifth house. This is the last little bit of Uranus in your fifth house. It's been there for about 7 years. And the way that I look at that opposition, this axis here of fifth house, 11th house, is that this is us and our authenticity, our own personal, soulful, creative expression of ourselves as we really are, our genuine joys and pleasures and things like this. But the 11th house is where some social influences can come in and where we can feel the sense of other people's expectations upon us and needing to live up to them, needing to conform a little bit with the social group, which is natural that we would do that. But there is that kind of dichotomy there of being really authentic, really expressing yourself fully and completely, and sometimes, running into other people's expectations or even our projected thought of what other people's expectations would be upon us, right? So re-examining that need to fit in or to belong, any sort of inhibitions specifically that winds up creating as well, and any sort of patterns around relating or expectation. Do you sometimes maybe even expect for socializing to be draining? Now, again, if you are an INFJ type, that would have a whole history behind it, I'm sure, of knowing that you wind up getting a little bit exhausted. But maybe there's a way of doing that where you're less concerned about how you're coming off and how other people are taking you, and allowing for that to be their responsibility to handle and not your responsibility to need to fit into a certain form, so that you're not stepping on other people's toes by just being you or whatever, when you don't put that onus on other people as well. So looking at that as honestly as you can, looking at those patterns and so forth. And there may also be here connecting with a spiritual community. So that's one of the things that kind of comes up when we're dealing with the 11th, 12th house cusp, is connecting either with a physical, like human spiritual community, or connecting more and seeing more comfort and benefits and a friendly kind of an attitude from your spiritual connections as well, and feeling like you really fit in with spiritual energies and entities and so on. So you may even see that there's some help from the other side, or feeling like there's a bit of like understanding, a greater understanding of the assistance that you receive, especially when it comes to your hopes, dreams, aspirations, things like this, from the other side. And maybe even how certain things have been exposed to you regarding who is helpful and who is not, even in the human realm. So if there are any bumps along the road with issues of people either being supportive of you or not, I would also look at that as pretty good opportunity to see who's supportive, right? If someone's not supportive, yeah, you don't have to bother opening up to them quite as much, and maybe spending a little less time with them, maybe addressing things that are less important or significant with them, But also then considering matters of, oops, I have a typo there, sorry. Considering what are your true aspirations, and what outside influence is there over those as well. As that Mercury dips into the 12th, it's going to get into what's real internally for you. It's going to get straight into your inner world and then come back out into this 11th house. And so where is the social influence even upon what it is that you think that you want for yourself? There may be some revelations basically around what you truly want versus what you feel like you should want. So I would definitely recommend like treading in those waters a bit and thinking that through and really putting your mind to that. Even utilizing that opposition with Uranus in the fifth house, which is pulling in those themes of your own pleasures, your own joys, and embracing the fact that those are unique. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn. So I do hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, this Mercury retrograde is transiting between your 11th and your 10th houses. So this is relatively straightforward. These are both very aspirational, ambitious places. This is your public life, basically, and your public standing, your colleagues, your superiors, and your goals, right? So there's a lot of overlap between these houses that's pretty easy and tangible to perceive of. So there's likely to be a huge amount of reconsideration along all of those lines with regard to ambitions and aspirations with regard to your public life. So with regard to like what it is that you want to create of yourself in the world, you may be shifting some direction along those lines. And you may be even considering how that is playing into your daily working life, as well as your material or reward based kind of expectations, and whether or not those are getting satisfied at this point. Maybe this is even reconsidering a specific position that you are in. And of course, I always recommend taking your time with any sort of decisions along those lines. But you may be just looking at the position that you're in a little bit differently with regard to maybe it's wonderful and maybe you have been just feeling frustrated on the day to day. Maybe it is inherently frustrating and you've been just trying to get through it and not complain, right? So regardless of which way that you've been looking at that, trying to look at it from all angles and just be really honest with yourself about where you're at, where you're trying to go, and whether the position that you're in is going to get you there, right? So with Mercury going out into the 11th and then back into the 10th, you may also have some people kind of in your corner trying to directly help you out, trying to directly give you a leg up. And so those people may really make themselves apparent, right? By sticking their neck out for you or by giving you really excellent advice or taking you under their wing, something like this. You may even make a friend of a superior or something like this, and just recognizing who's in your corner, basically, I think is also a way that this is going to play out. And this is going to be pretty much career or public life based. So if it's not a traditional kind of job or career or something, this could be a client that really has your back, that is supportive of the development of your business. This could be if you hold a position of influence within your community, also someone who's really in your corner and who supports your vision there. Whatever it may be that you are trying to create of yourself in the world, there could be people coming out of the woodwork to help you there, and maybe even to inspire you. There may be some sense of feeling reignited towards some ambitions or towards some aspirations. Maybe this is looking at an old goal or dream of yours that you may have forgotten about a bit in the push and pull of everyday life and trying to remain steady and be responsible and so on and so forth. There may be someone that you're seeing even just out in the world that is either doing something that you have wanted to do, or they are reminding you of your own kind of spirited nature. And the fact that when it comes to our ambitions and our goals and things, we do hopefully want for them to be genuinely inspirational to us and not just about how am I going to get to the next month or how am I going to save the most amount of money, things like this. So also opportunities to develop reciprocally beneficial connections. So this could even be an opportunity for you to take someone under your wing and to support them as well. Looking at that from all angles, it's likely that that would be really mutually beneficial too. So being really supportive of others is likely to be repaid, if not now, then down the road, certainly. With the longer term timetable that we're kind of dealing with this Mercury retrograde being aligned to Saturn and Jupiter retrograde as well. And yeah, finally, just looking at your goals and your aspirations and who you want to be, who you want to become, and what you want to be seen as, what you want your legacy to be, what you want to be remembered for. Looking at that from as many different vantage points as you can. This isn't about just short-term decisions and getting ahead quickly or anything like that. Like I said, the fact that this Mercury is tied into Jupiter and Saturn, these are our big long-term goals. Where we're standing, what our foundation is, and how we improve upon that over the long term and make that really sustainable. So this isn't the kind of Mercury retrograde where it's the standard issue, oh, try not to make a decision that you're going to get locked into early on in the retrograde because later on in the retrograde period, you're going to change your mind. No, we're dealing with much longer timetables here. This could go back certainly to 2020 when we had the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, and that set in a new Jupiter Saturn cycle that is now reaching its trine point. And this Mercury retrograde is speaking directly to that, and the how the day-to-day decisions that we make can impact that bigger, longer term vision. Or it could be even wider and broader than that. But those decisions that we make now, it's not for that short term gain. It's about this bigger picture of what is it that you're really wanting to achieve, and how can you, over the long term, set yourself up long term to achieve that really grand vision, not so much a focus on getting every single step absolutely right. So, if this looks something like taking a step back from these big questions around ambitions and aspirations and things like that, and just looking at them and feeling your way through them, don't feel like you're missing out on this transit. This is all about thinking things through and reconsidering things. It's not so much about taking certain steps or whatever. There may be some wonderful opportunities that are presented to you to connect with people in a wonderful way, but this is really, again, about that bigger framework. So I would definitely recommend looking at that and looking at, again, what's the foundation, Saturn tied into this, and then how do we develop that long term, the way that Jupiter is tied into this as well. Yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius. So pretty cool transit, and I hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, we have the Mercury retrograde taking place, transiting between your 10th house and your ninth house. So the themes that tend to overlap between these houses is what our visions are for what we're trying to create of ourselves, and then how we actually wind up implementing that, right? So the preparation work and the philosophy basically behind what it is that we want to achieve and create in the world, the legacy that we're wanting to create, and then how, again, we actually execute upon that. So there's likely to be a lot of reconsideration of the development of your public life, your public standing, your legacy, your ambitions, your achievements, and things like this. This may even cause you to feel like, okay, I've reached a culmination point in my development or in my career or in my public standing or in this phase of my life, and I want to reach for something more. And so that would be that going back into the ninth house, which reaches for things and may wind up pulling you into courses of learning or just a different field of learning, a way of expanding into a new direction in order to weave that into your public life and what you're creating of, like the tapestry basically of your life. So yeah, like I said, this could be reaching into some courses, some classes. It could even be checking in on alignment of your spiritual values, your philosophical values, your ethics, and things like this with regard to your public life as well, and thinking along those lines and trying to get that all straightened into alignment. I don't feel like we're ever 100% on that, but this can pull you back closer to that, pull those things closer together. Now, outside of education, this could speak quite literally to retraining or revisiting some skills. And this doesn't have to be like going for another like graduate degree or something like this. This could just be there's this extra thing like human relations or something like that. If that's not your field, knowing how to work with like communication with other people and so forth, that can help pretty much anyone in their career, right? Or organizational skills or time management or something like this. It could even just be this literal thing of, I know that I can do my goals and my achievements better, and maybe even in a more efficient time frame, if I tie in these personal development improvements into how it is that I'm utilizing my skills as well. Also, what aspects of your aspirations, ambitions, achievements, and things like that, what do you really enjoy about that? What is the pleasure principle about that? What is it that you feel like you are getting personally out of all of that? Checking in on that, I think, is going to be really meaningful as well, as that Mercury winds up aligning 3 times with Saturn and Neptune, which are in your first house, which is really having you come into a whole new cycle of who you are. And then in trine to Jupiter as well in your fifth house, which is being very encouraging when it comes to your creative expression and your authenticity, your uniqueness, your pleasure, your joy. So what is it about your goals that you really align with? Just on every level, thinking that through and probably writing some of this down. If you can journal about some of this, I think that's also going to be super helpful. If there's anything that you feel like you haven't quite achieved yet, and maybe you feel like you're not quite sure how to get there, journaling helps with that a lot. I know that a lot of people say that, and I know it sounds kind of cliche, but it really, really helps to write down, even if you don't know quite how to get there, what it is that you're setting out for, right? So also reprioritizing around some more abstract goals as well. So again, this doesn't just have to be career. So we do have those literal aspects potential in this of like retraining and upskilling and so on and so forth. But this could also be abstract goals and abstract aspirations. Who is it that you want to be? What is it that you want to be remembered for? Maybe there is a need to reprioritize along those lines of if you've been pushing, trying to achieve titles and income and all of these kinds of things. Maybe this is calling you back into that more spiritual, creative, aligned, spirited aspects of yourself. And also reminding you, what do you want to be remembered for? It's probably not, oh, she was really great at this aspect of her job that she didn't care about that much, but she did really well, right? So getting more in touch with how is it that you want to make people feel? Like what is the energetic memory and impact that you want to have on people? This can really bring you back to that as well. Now, I will say, just with this Mercury retrograde, a little bit of a warning with this would be if there are any ethical issues or potentially legal issues that are going on with your work, I would steer way clear of any of that kind of stuff. Or just try not to involve yourself. There may also be something here about marketing and putting yourself out there more, publishing. Maybe there's a way in which you can utilize social media to kind of springboard you as well. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what I wanted to mention. There could also be some travel opportunities or something like that. Maybe even if you work for a company, look into whether they have any sort of higher education or coursework resources available for employees, if that's something that you're interested in too. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what I wanted to mention for you with this Mercury retrograde. So I hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.